Hello, my name is Amy. I'm one of the clinical psychologists in the pediatric cardiology psychology team. Today, we're going to be going through the next in our webinar series, which is called Preparing Your Child for Coming into Hospital. How do the webinars work? Well, in terms of the aims of the webinars, they're not designed to be an individual or a group therapy. Indeed, today is pre-recorded, but instead more of an information resource and a space for you now to think about the advice that might help coping in terms of preparing your child to come into hospital. Unfortunately, we're not able to provide specific advice for your own child or family member, but we will go on at the end to think about who can support you with this and other teams and charity organisations, as well as any immediate or crisis support that might be required too. In terms of looking after yourself, today some of the content might trigger some emotions or some things that might remind you of difficult or different experiences for your family, whether these might be currently going on for you and closer to the surface and the current situation or not, and remind you of times, for example, previous hospital admissions. So we'd really encourage you to take a break and to stop watching if you need to. These recordings are available for you to dip in and out of as and when you feel able to. In terms of what may be helpful to consider now, just while we're thinking about looking after yourself, is whether there's something that you might do after listening to this webinar today, or somebody that you might be able to speak to about what you've listened to, especially if you've noticed becoming distressed during watching. If you would like to speak with a member of the psychologist in our team and are eligible to do so, we will highlight how you can do this at the end of the webinar. The webinar today is around 30 minutes. Unfortunately, we can't do questions at the end because it's pre-recorded. And we're new to doing these webinars, so we'd really value your feedback so we can make them as helpful as possible to other parents. So the experiences of families. It's really important to recognise that this is a stressful time for you as a parent, as well as understandable to be feeling apprehensive or nervous about coming into hospital if this is something that you're looking ahead to currently. We know and understand that coming into hospital will be a really different experience for each child and family based on experiences that they might have had as a family in the past, or as parents too, and their own experiences of experiencing hospital and medical care. It's really normal to experience lots of different thoughts and feelings, and these can be both positive. For example, an admission representing a step towards perhaps finding some answers, or a move in a different direction for the care of your child. But there might also be negative thoughts and feelings around as well, around how the admission might play out, and seemingly these both might be something we're holding in mind throughout the time that you're here. So this presentation will contain some ideas from our psychology service in terms of preparing your child for coming into hospital based on our experiences of supporting other families through the cardiac pathway. There are some other webinars that you might like to take a look at that you should be able to find um, around the links of where you were able to access this presentation today. Some of those webinars include managing the impact of having a child with a heart condition for parents, supporting siblings of a child with a heart condition, as well as mindfulness and relaxation. And do keep an eye out for any additional webinars that may be added there in the future. So how do we prepare a child for coming into hospital? We've organised this presentation today into 4 sections. The first is how to talk to your child about coming into hospital, how to help children to identify what they're feeling, to identify existing coping strategies, and learn strategies for managing worry. So talking to your child about coming into hospital, well, we know that parents will often tell us that they worry about how and how much to tell their children. And of course, it's so important to say from the beginning that at different ages and at developmental stages, the need for and types of information that children are likely to need and benefit from may change. What we do know is that children often understand more than adults think they do, that children cope much better when they understand why they're coming into hospital and are involved in this, and that when we leave gaps, children can fill these, and this can in turn increase their worry and fear. We know that talking to children gives them the opportunity to explore their worries and ask questions with you, their parents, and this can help them feel safer. It's very tricky to say with certainty when might be the right time to talk to your child about coming into hospital. So we often think with parents about being guided by your child, your understanding of their level of understanding and ways of coping. We want to give children enough time to prepare and adjust, but this is in balance with not leaving too much time to increase potentially space for worry and anxiety. So, as a rough guide, we might think about telling younger children about the visit to hospital or an admission a day or two in advance. And for some older children, they will want more time to get ready. So, perhaps telling them a few more days or a week or so beforehand may be beneficial. This will be inherently down to each parent and child and what your sense of what is right for your child and your family. How do we talk to children about coming into hospital? Well, again, there are no absolutes in terms of these kinds of conversations, but we know that being led by your child and how much they want to know is really important. So just remaining curious and open to the questions as and when they arise. To be honest, in an age appropriate way, and using words that your child will understand. And we know that there are some really helpful books and play resource videos that can help support talking about procedures and operations and admissions to hospital. For example, Sammy's heart operation, or there's some play video example resources at the end of this presentation today that I will signpost you to. So this can just model and show some examples of how we might start to have these kinds of conversations and the words that we might use in having these conversations with children. It's really important to say when we're thinking about what we tell children that, and it's easier said than done, but to try not to worry about not knowing all of the answers. We know that as parents, you are learning too, and some things you may not know and may be surprised by exactly what your child is asking questions around. So it's okay to not know the answer, to be open and honest around this, and to perhaps let your child know that you thank them for bringing that really helpful question to you, and that you'll try and find somebody that can answer it and you'll let them know. So this might be speaking to your cardiac nurse, for example, or speaking to your child's doctor, and maybe in that conversation, thinking with them about how they might vary or adjust the language to the age of your child in explaining the answer to them. We can also encourage children to write out questions that they might have together to um, provide some kind of structured space to think about what's going on in their head and what questions that they have got, and then you can use these as a template for going to the medical team and the nursing team to get them answered for them. So what do we talk about? Well, in terms of a general framework, it can be really helpful to give them an idea about what will happen when they come to hospital, when it's likely to happen, where, why they're having the procedure, and who else might be there. So, in terms of what, when, and where, we can use resources such as the ward tours. So, for example, the Dolphin Ward at Bristol Children's Hospital, there's a ward tour link available on at the end of this presentation today that you could take a look at, and then if you feel like it might be helpful to look at it with your child so that they have some familiarization of what the space looks like. We know that this can really support putting some kind of imagery to their imagined idea about what the hospital environment might be like, to give a simple explanation of why they need to have the procedure and also who will be there. And again, if you're not sure about who this might be, then you can speak to the cardiac nurses, but also resources like Sammy's Heart Operation are really helpful to introduce some different members of the medical team and the nursing team who might be present around for your child and there to keep them safe. We want to talk to children about how long that they will probably be in hospital. Again, this can be really tricky, but to think with your child's team about what the estimated time of the admission is likely to be can be helpful. And in these conversations, you can be thinking with your child about things that they might be packing in their bag that are going to help keep them busy and occupied and be keeping them um, yeah, occupied essentially. And you can use this to make a bit of a plan with your child about what they might do when they're feeling better. In terms of consolidating this with your child, again, this will be individual for each child and family as to whether you feel like this might be helpful, but you might write out a bit of a plan together so that this can support their understanding. We know that children might come back to you with the same questions frequently, even though you might have had these discussions already, and that's absolutely normal and understandable. But it might be helpful to have a point of reference to support your conversations and when these questions are arising again. So you might write out a bit of a plan together, or a poster, or a story together. Um, it could use some of the headings such as "I'm going to hospital for dot dot dot. This will help me by dot dot dot. These are the things that will happen dot dot dot. These are the people I will see dot dot dot. These are the things I'm going to want to take with me. These are some of the things that are going to help me." Just some ideas. We want to check children's understanding when we're having these conversations. We know it can be really tricky for parents, and indeed as professionals, sometimes we might think that we have given explanations of what's going to happen, but sometimes we find that children might misinterpret, and where there are kind of blank spaces left, that children might fill them with their own explanations. And this is really important because we know that, especially for some younger children, this is a time when they have their most active imagination and will think about different things, including monsters under the bed or fairies in the garden. And they use this to fill in the gaps. And this is just an example inherited from a predecessor of a picture of some kind of body parts, and you can see here that the top quote, for example, "I have a demon in my belly," or they were told they had an edema in their belly, but they'd misheard. The the second was, so you're checking to see if my heart is still there. A stethoscope was used to find out how well their heart was, and that was their kind of interpretation of that. And I had a nightmare about the battle going under my skin. That they were told, or the child told the psychologist, that the white blood cells are like an army that fights tricky viruses in their blood. So we know that young people can make mistakes in the links that they make. We know that telling a child isn't the same necessarily as understanding. So it isn't enough to have one off conversations, or for them just to have conversations with certain members of the team, such as psychology or nursing. We need to keep trying to have conversations with them to establish what their understanding is. And often we know that young people might be worried about things that are different to what we think they might be worried about. Sometimes they'll say to us that they know that um, there's kind of big things that are uncertain, but there are other things that make admissions worse for them, such as whether they might experience pain at certain times and maybe not being um, clear on or having understanding about how we might work with the child and family to reduce experiences of pain. Maybe not knowing when they can eat or not, or whether you might be able to stay with them as their parent overnight, which you can on Dolphin Ward in the bed space. Um, Maybe not understanding the doctors and what they've said. So there might be lots of different things that a child could be uncertain about. So we want to just keep promoting opportunities to have conversations with them to check this. Next, we're going to think about helping children to identify what they're feeling. So we know that identifying feelings and emotions is something that we develop as we get older, and therefore children might need help in identifying what they're feeling. They might not express their worries in ways that we might expect, or might not be immediately obvious to us. We know that worries might be expressed in different ways, such as changes in behaviour, and this might happen at home or at school or other places that they go to. Perhaps they need more reassurance than usual, or are finding separations or transitions difficult. There might be changes in appetite that you notice, perhaps not wanting to talk about coming into hospital, maybe avoiding things that remind them of hospital. What we were saying before, asking lots of the same questions or the same question repeatedly. And there might be physical symptoms as well, like tummy aches and headaches. There's a slide here which just helps us to think about noticing the signs of anxiety. It describes what lots of people will know as the fight or flight response. So this idea that when we encounter or think about something scary, that our bodies might get ready to fight or to run away. This is an evolutionary process that we have found ourselves with, and it can give these strong feelings in our bodies and minds, such as feeling dizzy or breathing quickly, getting hot and sweaty, feeling butterflies in the tummy, um, feeling tight in our muscles and legs shaking. So we might notice these feelings in our child, or also um, they might come to us sharing that these are things that they are experiencing. So how can we identify feelings? Well, the bag of feelings exercise is just one way of doing this, and the reason why we felt it might be helpful to bring it to this webinar today is that it can help children to identify lots of different feelings about coming into hospital. And in doing so, this helps to normalise that there are lots of different feelings about coming in, and for the child and for you as a parent. And it gives an opportunity to think about ways of managing some of those more difficult feelings and emotions, which can lead to perhaps more conversations around what helps when they're experiencing these different feelings, and what help that they might need from others, such as you as the parent or the nursing team, when they're coming into hospital. So essentially what this looks like in practice is asking your child to draw out an outline of a bag, to ask them to write or to draw out all of the feelings, both positive and negative, that they can think about coming into hospital, and then drawing in the bag how much space that feeling takes up until the bag is full. And this can just help open up the conversation in a way that's it's indirect in many ways, in that you're both able to focus on something in front of you, which is the bag, rather than maybe looking at each other, which might make it a bit easier for this space, and provides the opportunity for your child to understand that what they're feeling is normal, and allowing to focus on the positive as well as negative feelings about coming into hospital. In terms of coping strategies, we know that children have resilience as well as vulnerabilities, and that when we're having these kinds of conversations, we want to really draw upon your child's past experiences and resilience. This might be specifically past experiences of being in hospital and what you what you noticed or what you remembered about what were the things or um, what were the aspects of the admission that might have made it um, easier for them, or bits that they enjoyed, for example, specific toys that they took, or conversations they had, or foods that they ate, and what you noticed as a parent in terms of how they managed and what was helpful for them. And also, when we're doing this, we want to reflect on, as parents, what were the things that made it easier or harder for us in terms of supporting our child during that admission as well. So, this might be something that can be helpful to talk about with other people that might have been supporting you during the time. We want to have a think about what they would usually do when they have that specific feeling, such as worry, and what makes them feel better. So, you might actually make a list or a collage or draw this out, thinking about what the child would like to do or what would help when they feel upset before admission and maybe when they're in hospital, um, what they'd like to bring in with them, such as their favourite toys or books, music, pyjamas, tablets, maybe games that they'd like to play to distract themselves. We often think about things like word games or letter games, like naming as many animals that begin with different letters of the alphabet, or um, football teams or football player names. So just thinking about different ways that they can keep themselves occupied and distract themselves, and things that they things that they enjoy. In terms of coping strategies for managing procedures, so for example, if your child needs to have things like blood tests or ECG or echo while they're in hospital, we want to think about giving them choices. So having had some conversations around how they might like to manage these in advance can be really helpful. So, for example, letting children know that there are options of how it can maybe feel a little bit easier for them. So, for example, would they like to talk through what's happening before or during? Um, would they prefer to look away or look? Uh, in terms of distraction, would they like to sing with you as their parent, or have their headphones and watch their iPad? Would they like to be silent, or would they like to make a noise? For example, singing, or maybe like roaring like a lion when they're having a blood test. Uh, what else? What else can we think about giving in terms of choice for managing procedures? Might be who's in the room, which parent you're going to sit on. There's another really helpful resource around managing procedures that I'll signpost you to at the end, but it can just be really helpful to be promoting this idea of there being choice around managing procedures. Also, what you might like to do, or what your child might like to do or look forward to after, and this might be in line with positive reinforcement. So, having something nice to do with you or to watch with you. And we know that our play specialists are often on the ward with stickers and certificates and things like that. So, this can just be really helpful to think of in terms of the before, during, and the after of coping strategies during procedures too. So, in terms of identifying worries, this is often one of the first um, steps. So, identifying the specific aspects that they're worried about. We've mentioned this before, but we know that often this might be very practical things that some things can be done about. So, um, we want to encourage children to identify specifically what these are, because this will help us as parents to see whether there are specific answers that might be able to be given or supported. There's a couple of examples here in terms of a worry box or a worry jar. We've had families that have used worry monsters before, which I believe you can buy online, where we're encouraging the child and maybe other members of the family too to write down what their worries are, and then them being placed in a place in the home, such as one of these boxes or jars or the worry monster, and then creating some space and some time to go through these together. So this would be the concept of worry time, whereby if we find that the child is coming with lots of different worries at lots of different times of the day, of course we want to be responsive to answering the child and to make them feel safe, but also sometimes it can be helpful to have scheduled time as a family, um, around sort of 15 minutes, not too close to bedtime, where there's sort of explicit time created to think about worries and maybe worries of other people in the family, such as siblings. This might be looking through the worries that they've written down and talking about them together. And as a parent, you might want to go and have a look at these ahead of time just to prepare yourself for what they are. This creates a bit of space and time also for you to have a think about how you want to answer or any other information that you might want to gather. But as we said before, it's okay to model that sometimes you won't know the answers, but again, thanking them for bringing them to you and letting them know how you might try and get them answered. Whether worry is something that you can perhaps do something about, then this gives a really good opportunity to think about a solution and plan when you'll do this with your child. Once worry time is over, and again, it might be helpful to use an egg timer or a phone alarm. Um, you can think about when the next time for worry time might be. So that might be the next day, and to support your child to change their focus on other things. So, really modeling the idea of using ideas, their coping strategies and skills as part of a toolkit, if you like, of what they think might be helpful to um, change the focus of their attention, to distract themselves, to relax, and and perhaps this might be around being with you and having something nice to do together. So relaxation, we know that this thinking part of our brain, um, where we might be trying to have conversations with our child around ideas, solutions, strategies, things that might be helpful for them, is almost impossible to bring online if there is a really high level of anxiety. We just know that our brains don't work as optimally when we're feeling that high level of threat. And this is the same for us as adults too. So, what we need to focus on in these moments is this idea of regulating our emotions and promoting safety. And there are some really nice, simple relaxation strategies for children that we might use to support with this. Due to timing today, I'm just going to talk to you about one of them very briefly, which is balloon belly breathing. But I'd really encourage you to go online to places like YouTube and see what's out there. There's also a few links at the end of this presentation today. For example, Headspace have a section for supporting children to relax, and this might be in quite a kind of active way and brief way, just in terms of modelling how we might just come back to our breath as a way of calming down. So, balloon belly breathing is simply this idea of imagining and supporting your child to imagine that they've got a balloon in their tummy that they're making bigger, and they're making it bigger with the in breath, which might be through the nose, and then deflating it with the out breath, which will be through the mouth. But it's okay not to get too tied up and bogged down with where the breath is coming in and out of and for how long. It's just about slowing the breath down, and you supporting your child with this. So it can be really nice to something to do together. You might be lying on the floor together or a bed together or sitting up. You could place both of your hands quite actively on your tummy to really feel that imaginary balloon getting bigger and smaller. Might flesh this out a bit further by asking a child to close their eyes and imagining the balloon being a specific colour, maybe their favourite colour or a colour that you might think of as being calm. You might use some words, some language to just promote the idea of the balloon getting bigger and smaller. So you could be saying bigger, smaller, or you might be saying in, out, or you might be saying calm. So whatever works for you. But this is just one way of quite actively in the moment, just concentrating and paying attention to the breath, especially if you notice that your child is getting more out of breath or more worked up, and it can just again be really helpful for you to model this idea of just coming back to slowing down, especially if we're trying to have conversations around, like I said, turning that thinking part of the brain on. It's much less likely to be helpful if there's not some sense of calm and relaxation and rest in your child. Finally, as parents, we know that looking after yourself can help you to look after your child too. And managing stress can involve some quite quick strategies as well as some more long term changes. We often use the metaphor of the oxygen mask when we're on a planes, so that we want to make sure that we're looking after ourselves, so that we can look after others. And this is a really important metaphor for those who spend a great deal of their time caring for others. We we know that we can't pour from empty cups, so taking care of ourselves and thinking about the basics of our well-being is really important. We'll all have different coping strategies, and these might be different from your friends, your partner, your family. And so it can be really helpful to just take a moment to think about what works for you, what's helpful at different times, and what you might be wanting to think ahead for the admission. There's things that you might pack in your bag, or how you might manage things like taking breaks from hospital to um, we often think with parents about different coping strategies that they might use that might have some unintended consequences. So, for example, this might be things like the use of um, alcohol or keeping busy, and that we know that they, in the short term, can help us depart or be distracted from the present moment, but there are unintended consequences to that in terms of it perhaps having an impact on our health, or in terms of just keeping busy, 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 go, 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 means that we're more likely to feel burnt out and feel exhausted. So just taking a moment to think about how we might respond and react to stressful circumstances can help us just plan ahead for what we might be needing to think of again in terms of taking care of the basics of our well-being, keeping hydrated, having some food, taking some breaks from the ward, opportunities for relaxation, albeit brief, and connecting with others and important people in our life. That's the end of the core of our presentation today, and I'm just going to run through some of the resources here for you in terms of further support. So, as part of the psychological health services offer, if your child is a patient of the cardiology team at the Bristol Royal Hospital for Children, you can inquire about any additional psychological support that you might be eligible for by speaking to your child's medical team, or by contacting our service on the number here in the slides. You can also speak to your cardiac clinical nurse specialists, and speak to them also, or when you're on the ward, about accessing play specialist team who might be able to support with things like distraction, or explaining or supporting you and your family to explain and understand different procedures that the child might need to have whilst in hospital. There's also a chaplaincy team who can come and meet with you on the ward. And we have our wellbeing toolkits, which provide a range of advice on how to navigate wellbeing alongside a health condition. And there are different toolkits, as you can see here, for children, for adults, parents, and teenagers. And the link is there. And you can also find it on the Bristol Royal Children's Hospital Psychological Health Services resource page as well. So you just click into each of those coloured quadrants and it provides you with a list of different toolkits that might be helpful. And they're really broad, they're not cardiac specific. For example, the child toolkit includes different uh, resources around being worried about having a medical procedure, being worried about coming into hospital, talking to their friends about their condition, feeling worried and low. The teenagers toolkit includes information on coping as a teenager with an illness, having trouble sleeping, and transitioning to adult services. And for parents, there's some helpful resources there around being a parent coping in hospital and supporting siblings. So go and take a look at those. They're a really helpful resource. We're really lucky to have a number of brilliant cardiac organisations and charities which have a wealth of information and their own support systems, groups, telephone lines, and information resources as well. So these are just to name a few. There's the Southwest Wales Congenital Heart Disease Network. So there's specifically an area called Getting Support there where you can find some more information around admission and just general resources that might be available to you. There's the British Heart Foundation helpline, and then some charities as well, including Heart Heroes. So take a look at those and have a think about whether any of those might be helpful for you to reach out to. In terms of resources about coming into hospital, there, as I've said before, there's the Children's Wellbeing Toolkit. There's a lovely video called A Little Deep Sleep, which might help to support some of the questions that arise or worries that arise around going to sleep or having an anaesthetic. Shows what happens before, during, and after an anaesthetic. So the link is there. As mentioned earlier, there's the Dolphin Ward Tour, which is again a nice opportunity to put a place, put the imagery of the place in your child's mind and have a think about where they might be and what it might look like. There's Sammy's Heart Operation, which is a British Heart Foundation book for around the age of 7 to 11-year-olds who are having heart surgery, which you might be able to use with your child to think about who they might meet in hospital, the different tests that they might have, and what will happen on the wards and when they can go home. There's also a YouTube video as well. As with all of these resources, we'd really encourage you as parents to be taking a look at them first, to review how you think your child might respond to them, and the level of the information to be presented. This is a decision for you to make as a parent. There's some really nice videos on the website here. It's called What Why Children in Hospitals. It shows a play specialist talking about different procedures. If you click on the teddy icon, so it goes through, for example, explaining a blood test or an ECG to a child and different things that you might use around the home, different craft materials used from quite simple things like cereal boxes and teddy bears for how you might, through play, think about preparing your child. There's lots of lovely storybooks for children and sibling on coming into hospital. If you take a look at Little Parachutes, and as mentioned before, the play specialist support may be accessed through uh, the hospital admission, so you can speak to the cardiac nurses or the wards team about whether they might be able to support you and your child during any aspects of the admission that you're concerned about. For slightly older children and teenagers, the British Heart Foundation has a nice resource called My Heart Op book, and there's a number of videos in their cardiac surgery video series that are around preparing for surgery, excuse me, and might help your child to not feel so alone with their experience. In terms of more general resources for mental health and well-being, here are some of the national as well as local organisations that support children and young people up to the age of 25. including Youth at Heart, who you might see some of their support workers on our wards, but also do lots of fantastic community work. Off the Record, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services resources, which provide some general information around managing anxiety and low mood and worry, as well as Young Minds, who have parent resources as well. And for relaxation and mindfulness, there are some here: Mood Cafe, Headspace, and Smiling Mind, to name a few. If you feel like you need any immediate support in either watching this webinar today or just generally, you're noticing feeling more distressed or having kind of concerns about your mental health and well-being, this is for you or your child, and you would like to access some further support, we would encourage you to speak to your general practitioner, your GP, as they'll be able to think with you about what's available to you locally and to review you locally as well, to ensure that you're getting all the support that you're able to access. For services that provide a listening ear in times of need and have 24-hour telephone and text line services, there's the Samaritans and Shout, and their numbers are listed here. If, however, you feel like you're in crisis or you feel unable to keep yourself safe, we would encourage you to be, as well as trying to contact your GP in working hours, to call 999 or attend your local A&E service. And if you're in Bristol during an admission and you notice some of these really difficult thoughts and feelings arising, the Bristol crisis number is listed here, which you can contact 24 hours a day, and your health team can also. For more general support for your and your child's mental health, there are some resources here, including Every Mind Matters, Young Minds, and Childline. And again, these resources have messaging and email and telephone support services that you can get in touch with. That's all for our presentation today on supporting your child coming into hospital from the Paediatric Cardiology Psychology Service. We do hope it was helpful. We're very receptive to feedback, so do let us know how you found listening today and whether there would be parts of this presentation that would be helpful to go into in more detail, or any other ideas that you might have for future webinar series. We hope it's been helpful to you, and many thanks for listening. Bye-bye.